Now, do you think that peace is the default condition of mankind? The normal state is peace, and war is an aberration resulting mostly from understandings? I mean, some people would say that the normal condition of mankind is war because everybody wants to dominate their neighbor and not be dominated by them, and everybody covets things that they cannot get through peaceful methods. They can only get by taking them by force from somebody else. So which is the norm, really?
I'm not sure it's one or the other, but if you talk about percentages of time spent in either pro-social behavior or antisocial behavior, you're going to see that as a species we spend far more of our time in pro-social behavior because biologically we're this interesting aberration in terms of a life form. We don't have claws, we don't have fangs, we don't even have fur, and so most of our survival comes from the fact that we're a herd species. We have to work together to survive and to deal with the harshness of nature. So we're really wired to cooperate and collaborate in most cases.
Well, aren't human beings divided into separate segments, different groups, where people are pro-social within their group, but they're antisocial toward other groups?
Excellent point, excellent point. So we see that kind of behavior happen again and again, where you increase the positive pro-social behavior within a group, and that actually pushes the conflict out to the edge, and then when that group bumps up against another group that is identifiably different in some way, that's where the conflict is actually worse, and so all you've done is move it to an edge somewhere. There's more work in the world going on these days, and Steven Pinker at Harvard is again pushing this work, to actually just make the group bigger. What if we began thinking of ourselves as the human species and realize that our biggest enemies are probably viruses and bacteria and so on, rather than other humans? There's a lot of indications that that circle is slowly expanding as we become more aware of each other. And so one of the things we see with technologies like Facebook, for example, is increased awareness. And people being able to give increased attention to, okay, now I see that my behavior over here actually affects somebody over there in ways that I had never known.
Now, is this sort of an ebb and flow where people might start to think of themselves as citizens of the world, but then back to their nation or their ethnic group or their religion? Because I think at any given time, people tend to identify with whatever group gives them the most power or the most advantages. And like a lot of people would say, identifying as a human doesn't give you much. That's not very cohesive. But a smaller group could be more cohesive.
Well, it's interesting because you're touching on the issue of identity. And one of the interesting times that we're in is that identity is becoming very fluid. So when we talk again to people in diplomacy or in defense, one of the things that they acknowledge is, what is a nation state now? Because we have these transnational communities. We have, for instance, I'm Mexican American, so there are more people who come from my mother's home state who live in Los Angeles than live in, her home state. And so when you have that kind of dynamic going on, then the question of being like, well, what does it mean to be an American, or what does it mean to be a Filipino when there's such a large expatriate population that live elsewhere? That challenges that notion. Especially
when it takes a lot of effort and maybe some sacrifice to keep that cohesion going.
Right.
And you have to decide, how much do I want to invest in these institutions?
So it puts into question institutions. It turns out that people start having multiple identities. So it may not be tied in real estate. Identity becomes a state of mind. We spent the day today at Facebook looking at their compassion research, and they're looking at affinity and how can they use affinity as a way to increase social cohesion within the social graph in Facebook. And they're just starting that kind of research and saying, like, what is it that they can surface, especially around conflict resolution on Facebook. And by bringing, the similarities that we have, how can we trigger compassion for each other, so that way when we are trying to resolve a conflict, we are more committed to resolving it peacefully.
Okay. We just have a few minutes left, and I said at the beginning that I wanted to talk a little bit about the Persuasive Technology Lab, which the Peace Innovation Lab grew out of, and which is still. So what was that about? It sounds a little manipulative, like you're going to persuade people to do something they might not want to do. How does that work? What's that all about? And how does that relate to what you do?
Okay, do you want to take that, Mark?
Sure.
Okay.
So, persuasive technology, we basically look at how does technology change human behavior. And underlying that, this is all built on the work of Dr. B.J. Fogg, I should be very clear about, and his work is built on the insights of people like Cliff Nass and Byron Reeves at Stanford, who noticed back in the 90s that we were giving our technology the same agency in our lives that we give to other people. And so BJ then started asking the question of, well, given that we're doing that, how can we make sure we're doing that in ways that help us become better people and help us do things we want to do, as opposed to having technology accidentally manipulate us to do things we don't want to do? So I can give you an example of accidental technological manipulation that caused people to do things they didn't want, and why we're trying to avoid that. The whole transition to smartphones, for example, we now see in the insurance data that if you own a smartphone, you're significantly more likely to be killed or injured in a car accident. That was one of the unintended outcomes of a technology that turns out to be very persuasive at diverting your attention.
Even if your hand's free?
Unfortunately, yes. So there are all sorts of interventions being built to try and solve that problem. Point being, technology does change our behavior. By the very act of us adopting it, our behavior changes. New technologies require new behaviors that then replace old behaviors in some ways. If we're not intentional about designing what those new behaviors are and making sure those new behaviors serve us, you can get accidental new behaviors that are very serious unintended consequences. So we look very carefully at what are the positive behaviors that we can. And
is there a consensus about what positive behaviors are? Because there could be a difference of opinion about what constitutes positive behavior.
Absolutely, and I was going to add on to Mark's comment that we're in an interesting time where there's a new group of people that have the ability to influence behavior at enormous scale, and it turns out to be software designers. Because software designers are, for the internet, they're trying to get people to do specific things. Or if you're an app designer, I'm trying to get you to do specific things.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it at that, unfortunately, because I've just gotten the signal. So we are going to have to wrap it up. I'd like to thank my two guests, Margarita Kiwis and Mark Nelson from the Stanford Peace Innovation Lab. Thank you for watching. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having us, Marty.
Thank you. Great job.
Great. Thank you.
Look, if the mics are off now, at least we think they are.
All right.
Sure about these things.